what context do you think that we need in order to set up today's class?
I think we have been doing context quite a lot in all of our episodes. I think we've covered that very nicely. And the two texts that we have to cover today are texts that don't really need a context. I think those are texts that we can look into by themselves and still make a lot of sense. But just a super high level context to bring us here in chapter 5. So Arjuna is in a predicament. He doesn't want to fight, although that is his duty. Krishna tells me, hey, you are not your body. You are a soul, eternally living. And it is best for you to do your duty and not be attached to the results. So with the understanding that I am not a body, that I'm a spirit soul, I should, in the meanwhile, as I am in the earth, I should do my duty to the best of my abilities and not be attached to the results. I can understand that I am a small part of something much greater. And as long as I remain connected to this greater aspect of reality, my understanding of that greater reality will connect me to it deeper and deeper as I continue to keep that in mind. So, and Arjuna is going back and forth. He's like, he's understanding it, but he keeps on asking the same questions again. But Krishna, please tell me again decisively, is it better for me to act or not act? And Krishna is constantly telling him it's better for you to act in the world. Don't be attached to the results because you're not a material body, you are an eternal soul. I'll start on text 14, because text 16 by itself, even though it's kind of like a contradiction, I say they stand on their own, but starting there is a little bit weird. So I'll start on 14. The embodied spirit, master of the city of his body, does not create activities, nor does he induce people to act, nor does he create the fruits of action. All this is enacted by the modes of material nature. Text 15. Nor does the Supreme Lord assumes anyone's sinful or pious activities. Embodied beings, however, are bewildered because of ignorance, which covers their real knowledge. Then, text 16. When, however, one is enlightened with the knowledge by which nescience is destroyed, then his knowledge reveals everything, as the sun lights up everything in the daytime. In text 17, when one's intelligence, mind, faith, and refuge are all fixed in the Supreme, then one becomes fully cleansed of misgivings through complete knowledge and thus proceeds straight on the path of liberation. So I believe that Varangi, in her return, the return of Varangi is today's episode, is quite inspired about text 16. So Varangi, what has been your realizations on text 16?
Thank you for that quick but really useful recap. Yeah, I guess first of all, it's really nice to be able to take a step back from physically being available in like the day-to-day routine, because it really puts things into perspective, like what's so valuable and how important it is to have a regulated life, you know? So we go on trips, we go on vacation, we engage with other family members, and it's so enriching and helpful, obviously, for overall, I think, emotional health. But when it comes down to your spiritual life, this is something that came up a lot during this time that I haven't been around for our Gita class podcast, which was how meaningful it is to have a weekly class where we really dive deep into philosophy and in training, and how, as much as I wanted to pick up a book, being away or on these trips and stuff, it wasn't the same. We read and we get inspired because the book itself obviously is sacred, and there's a lot of potency and energy from our teacher, Srila Prabhupada, who translated these verses for us and gave us the purports. But I really got to realize the power of community and hearing these texts from somebody that actually has seen the truth, you know, and somebody that puts these texts into his daily life, in practice in his daily life. And obviously I'm talking about Tukaram Prabhu. And he's not the only one. We have a long list of wonderful teachers who do this on a daily basis, but we're talking about the Gita class, Friday Gita class. So yeah, particularly about text 16, I was just looking back, and I'm glad that you didn't just start the reading with 16, because like you're right, this is a text that could be just fleshed out on its own, but it really makes it a nice flow to hear what Krishna's coming from, right? And so even just a few more verses before the 14, Krishna's talking about how somebody that does something out of duty, right, but is abandoning detachment, this is text 11, and they act with body, mind, and intelligence, and even engages the senses. You know, the senses are such a bad word in Eastern philosophy. It's like, if you're a sense enjoyer, that means that you are really in materialism. And that's something that's been part of our training. But we hear in Krishna consciousness, at least through Vaishnavism, right? That, which is this branch of Hinduism, how even the senses should be utilized, but for a higher purpose. So it's not about negating who we are or hating our body and our tendencies and our desires, but really learning how to use them to be able to upgrade. And so text 11, Krishna's talking about how the yogis, the people that are still engaging in this world, they're not renunciants, they're engaging in this world. They use their mind, their body, their intelligence, and even the senses to purify themselves. And of course, we've learned this far that it's not that we're fundamentally broken, but spiritually we're pure. Obviously, that's who we are. But through engaging with materialism, we have become contaminated. Just like water can become contaminated, but then through a process of purification, it can become potable again. The same thing, the soul has that quality of becoming potable. And so by this austerity of using everything that we have for a higher purpose, by connecting it to the Supreme, then we can become purified. And then Krishna goes on, text 12, 13, 14, and really continues to flesh out how karma yoga is the best way to live in this world and not become of it or become entangled. Now, when Krishna gets to text 16, he gives, is this an analogy? I know that's a dumb question, but I get confused about metaphors and analogies.
With the sun?
Yes.
I think it's an analogy.
It is an analogy, yes.
Okay, great. So then during class, Tukaram Prabhu was explaining the power of an analogy. You know, you first give Krishna's obviously the master of teaching, the best teacher. He's giving us certain points to think about, right? Which is, we're not this body, we're pure, how we can live in this world and not become of it, how we have a body and how we are the master of that body. Therefore, we're responsible for it, right? But we're not it, so we shouldn't think that we are matter simply because we as spiritual beings are living in that body. So then after introducing these points, he's giving an analogy to further help us understand these points. And during class, Tukaram really went deep and very much into detail about how it's impossible for us to understand something higher if we don't first have a point of reference that is closer to us. So we can only be able to wrap our head around something bigger, such as, you know, what's a bigger topic than theology, right? Talking about God and who he is and understanding him. So it's almost, and he's given this example, like a small ant trying to understand a relationship with an elephant. It's like impossible. It's like we can't even wrap our head around it. So there is that element of grace. But even not talking about grace, how do we practically start becoming more comfortable with these topics of spirituality and who we are and what we're not. So the answer is analogies, things that are close enough to us that we can relate to, but also serve as a bridge for us to be able to make that jump from this world to that other world, which is what we see here in this text. And so, like Sosa Prabhu read, when, however, one is enlightened, one meaning the yogi, right? The karma yogi, is enlightened with the knowledge by which nescience is destroyed, then his knowledge reveals everything, as the sun lights up everything in the daytime. So it's so beautiful, it's almost poetic, right? It's like, oh, but it's so loaded with meaning as well. And we can, several things that jump out is the fact that the yogi, it's an individual, right? We're seeing a separation. It's not just like all of us as one feel this. It's like the one person, the yogi who we've been talking about, that has been undergoing this process of purification, is enlightened with knowledge. So knowledge is another key word that comes up that Krishna has been bringing up and been, I think, introducing in different ways up until this point. And then nescience, like ignorance, things that are not helpful for our spiritual life, things that are negative, things that are maybe even entangling us more and more to this material world. And how with knowledge, that ignorance is destroyed, right? And how that knowledge reveals everything, not some things. It's like, if you gain this knowledge, then everything that you need to know will be revealed to you. Even stuff that you don't need to know will be revealed to you. That's how complete this knowledge is. Just like the sun lights up everything in the daytime. And so I think this is something that Tugaram Prabhu brought up in the last class, or maybe in other classes, but this is certainly is something I heard from him, which is that, you know, we have eyes, and these eyes are meant for seeing, you know, vision, but our eyes don't work to their fullest extent when we're in the darkness. So really, in a way, we're so dependent, not in a way, I think completely, we're so dependent on the sun to be able to utilize our eyes in the best way possible. So here, this is brought up in this text, and it's just so brilliant. Like, this text is so ancient, yet it's so relatable even today. And so the only way that we can see clearly and correctly, I would say appropriately, things about spirituality is through the knowledge that is given to us. It's not something that we just kind of are born into. Although we are spiritual beings, and by default we are full of knowledge, again, we have been covered over by our contact with materialism. So indirectly, and I think and I'm saying indirectly because it's not really in the word for word in the text, in the Sanskrit text, about where and how we get this knowledge, but certainly it is in the purport. And I wanted to really just dive into this topic, and it would be really nice if Kim also jumped in on this, because I know what it's something that also speaks to you about how knowledge, although we already have it by default because we are spiritual beings, it's also something, once we have been covered over, that we get from somebody that has that knowledge, that has walked this path, and that it's not something that we just get to experience on our own, just out of nowhere. And so again, this topic of gaining knowledge from a spiritual master, from a guru, but not just that, but from a bonafide, from a real spiritual master, is brought up in Srila Prabhupada's purport. And I thought that it would be nice for us to dive into that. What do you think, Kim?
Yeah, I really thought his purport really nailed it in detail about the benefits of knowledge. And I liked how you explained how we can understand things when they're close to us. So no matter where you are in your spiritual pursuits, you're going to relate to something that is close to you, something maybe happening in your life. So you can't just necessarily go big and want to know what God is all about when, say, you're struggling to pay the bills over here. So, yeah.
That's a nice
Yeah.
point. And how everybody is just really, who doesn't have experience with the sun? You know, even a child would know what the sun is because a child has experienced its warmth and the light and the difference between day and night, even though that child doesn't have complete knowledge about what the sun is as an entity and how far away it is from the earth and all these other crazy technicalities. He, even at a young age, can realize the impact the sun has in its life, right? So having this analogy as a way to explain how knowledge is something that will open our eyes, even though we already have some eyes, right? We already are knowledgeable by default. Knowledge that is given to us will give us that daylight, so to speak, to really see things clearly and be able to navigate this world in the appropriate way. I thought that was really wonderful.
So we talk about relationship oftentimes, and obviously we are very much into understanding our relationship with Krishna. And part of that relationship in our philosophy is that we do our part, which should be sincere and really try to serve Krishna. But then Krishna does his part, the elements of grace, as you pointed out earlier. And this analogy to me speaks to that as well, because we do have the eyes, which was given to us by Krishna. And the things that we need to see in order to recognize our actual position are also here, but due to ignorance, we cannot see. But the yogi is somebody who is by default sincere. The Krishna has been describing what that yogi is like. So that yogi is a person that has the element of sincerity and is truly looking for a better, like you said, an upgrade of their existence. But then Krishna will shed the light just like the sun. And that is Krishna's part. Like he's helping us to then see things that are already here. He already gave us the eyes. Things that we need to see in order to become wise are also already here, but due to ignorance, which is part of our desire too, we cannot see. But the moment we become sincere, then it's like 6:30 in the morning, you know, the sun starts to rise and then we are able to see everything. So I really like this aspect of the analogy that brings about this symbiotic relationship where through our sincerity, the sun would then rise and then we can see everything. So we're both, us and Krishna working together takes us to transcendence.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, and it's something that I really loved about the purport too, which you brought up. Srila Prabhupada here says that, therefore, one has to seek out such a bona fide spiritual master. It's not that it just manifests in front of you without you trying. It's like you said, that aspect of grace is there, but in order to unlock that treasure, I guess, then you need to activate it by seeking it out by some sincerity, right? And then under him or her, learn what Krishna consciousness is. For Krishna consciousness will certainly drive away all nitions, and the sun drives away, as the sun drives away darkness. So where there's the sunlight, there's no darkness. In the same way, when we gain knowledge, there's really, I don't know, I'm sure you guys can all relate, but have you ever been told, whatever you do, don't look at this, and like whatever they say, that's like all you see? Or like they show you a picture and they're like, what do you see here? And then it's like the first thing you see, and you can't unsee it, like the duck and a bunny. You've seen that, right? The psychological test. And if you see the duck, it's so hard to see the bunny. It's like no matter where, and even after somebody points it out, then you see the duck and the bunny, and then you can't unsee it now. So the same way, and I have had this experience so much in my spiritual life, a lot of things just happen gradually. It's not that, 10 years ago when I started on this journey, I understood everything. I could have understood a few things, but not as well as maybe today I do. And there are still today some things that I still don't completely fully understand, but because there are other things that have been fleshed out for me and have actually, they hold water, I have faith that these other things that haven't been yet realized will at some point at the right time come to be. And so in the same way, we just start out with something that that illuminates, that changes your reality, right? A little piece of information or a little piece of knowledge, just like you're not this body, reincarnation. We are qualitatively one with God. We are godly. You know, why live a life that sells us short of those great things? We're all meant to wonder for great and wonderful things in life. Why live out a life that even the cats and dogs can live, or, you know, living entities that have less of an opportunity to connect to something higher. And so when you put all these things into perspective, you really are able to understand what knowledge Krishna's talking about here is that knowledge which really transforms and I think in a way revolutionizes your life. And even though you don't completely understand it, even just a little dose of knowledge on a regular basis is enough for you to change your whole life. And so the aspect of grace, which Sosa Prabhu brought up, really then points us to, so the question that I had was, and this is something that I recently talked about with somebody that I really cared about, which was, oh, well, yeah, God will give me everything I need. You know, if I'm sincere, I want to know God, I'm a spiritualist, I'm spiritual. I don't need a community, I don't need a temple, I don't need a church, I don't need a teacher, I don't need anything. Like, I'm a spiritual being. You're right, I agree with you. And I believe in God, and God is good. And so I can just connect and call out to him whenever I want. That is certainly something that's very normal nowadays, and something that I personally believed strongly before coming into contact with this tradition. But that is actually completely the opposite of what Krishna is saying here. Would you guys like to resolve this doubt for me? Not even a doubt, but could you explain how that's actually not the case, and why we actually need, how does knowledge come into being? You know, it sounds really nice in this term, like, oh, like the sun comes. So in a way, it's like, oh, okay, if I believe in God, then God will just, like, the skies will part and I'll get all the knowledge I need, and that's all I need, and then I'm a good person and I'm good to go. Why do I need to do anything extra? What would be how could you help me understand that that's actually not the path to knowledge?
Well, in chapter 2, Krishna explains we are the soul and not the body. However, that soul is within the body. The body, being gross matter, is also represented by subtle matter, which we call it the intelligence, mind, and ego. Part of this mind is our psychology. So our psychology is something that also covers us. If I have the thought that I can speak to God directly and God will give me everything I need and then I'll become enlightened, if that was to be part of your karma, that you would have such an attention of God, that God would actually give you all that knowledge at once, you may get it. But little by little, your psychology will get the best out of you. If you are not around people that continuously reinforces that knowledge you were once given, you're going to forget. So we need to become aware, like, exactly what is the situation of the soul. When we are looking to buy a new home, for example, it would be quite normal for the family to do research in the neighborhood. Like, is this a safe neighborhood? Is this a violent neighborhood? Is this going to be appropriate for my kids to grow up? So there are a bunch of questions you would ask, because you naturally would be inclined to realize, where am I? What are the conditions that are going to influence my lifestyle? Similarly, we should ask that of ourselves as souls in the body. We have a psychology. Psychology is something very profound and deep. In fact, many prominent psychologists, one of which I follow quite closely, have collected enormous amounts of data on lobsters. And you may ask, why lobsters? Well,
Yeah.
turns out lobsters have been around for 250 million years. It may not sound as much, but the dinosaurs were around 56 million years ago. So the lobsters were around 260 million years ago. So they preceded dinosaurs for a long, 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 long time. And the neurochemistry of lobsters are in so many ways identical to ours, especially when it comes down to hierarchical position in society. So which is to say, if I feel defeated, let's say I got into a physical fight or a verbal argument where I was defeated, let's say I was defeated some goal, I didn't accomplish something, right? Then our brain will have less serotonin, which is the actual hormone. That serotonin then causes me to like walk around hinged over. I feel less, I'm more prone to be depressed, etc. In fact, people nowadays that are being treated for depression, they are given serotonin. Then it causes their physical being to actually stand up straight with their shoulders back and be welcome the challenges again and get out of depression is one of the main drugs that are being treated for depression. Well, as it turns out, when you study lobsters, they're very territorial. They're very hierarchical beings. So they fight for territories and they fight for suitable mates. So when two males engage into a fight, they're oftentimes fighting for a territory and the females that are part of that territory. So the two lobsters will engage into a fight, and the lobster who is defeated, that lobster will then hinge its back, will lose its physical shape, will actually be smaller, will contract. And that lobster will give away the territory, will no longer ever try to fight for that territory, allowing the winner lobster to then take over the territory. And along with the territory, the females, right? So then that is the winner and this is the loser. And that loser lobster will never fight again, will never again challenge another male lobster for territory or for the females, right? Until in the lab, with like data being collected, we inject serotonin on these lobsters, only to then see them rising again going and picking up fights with other males for other territories, and again looking for suitable mates. So why am I bringing this up? How is this relevant? Well, this is lobsters. And this chemical serotonin has that tremendous effect on lobsters as it does on us, human beings. And the similarities are there, right? So we're not even different from lobsters. So this hierarchical position of, you know, I have to have this territory, I have to have these things, otherwise my actual psychology is impacted by the hormones that are there or not, has been around for at least 250 million years. And it impacts lobsters the same way that impact us. The behavior is the exact same. So for us to think that we're going to have one experience where God told us everything and got us enlightened, and that we are going to now be able to carry that over without the influence of our psychology coming back at us, it's naive at best, because our psychology is very powerful. It determines how humans, lobsters, work. And we need a reinforcement. Having gotten knowledge, having gotten true knowledge, it may give us that wisdom for about 1 or 2 days, but then all the contents of our psychology, of our mind, of our body, of our environment, they're going to creep in and we're going to forget. And this part, again, is part of our psychology. We are subject to forget stuff. So if we do not have a spiritual community, a spiritual master or spiritual masters that will constantly be reinforcing this knowledge, we will forget. And if we believe that we can read a book and carry that wisdom with us forever, that's naive at best, right? Because our psychology is very, very powerful. It's something that It's been in all kinds of animal species for at least 250 million years. And we are not going to be able to crack the codes of our psychology without constant reinforcement of a bona fide spiritual community.
Yeah, you make an interesting point about, well, if someone wanted to have all the knowledge that they needed to understand God, God could conceivably give all that knowledge. But then we start diving into the area of free will, where let's say we did have all the knowledge about God, everything was self-evident, and then there would be no choice anymore. We'd have the truth right before us. And so then we start to get into this idea of being somewhat of an automaton, like, oh, that's God. Yes, I love God. I have no choice but to love God. You know, it becomes more of a lack of free will, where in our tradition, we believe in an all good God who desires to have love from us. And that just changes the whole ball game to me, coming from a Christian perspective, Christian background that I grew up with, where God is desiring that love from us. And so with someone, Varangi, who would ask that question, when I was growing up, when I was a child, I had a huge issue with Catholicism, with the whole confessional. And I had the same thought, like, why would I confess all my sins to another human being, another flawed human being? And so for someone who might, as an adult, come with the same idea of, well, I don't know if I dig this whole guru thing because they're just another flawed human being, they might be having some experiences from that mindset of my salvation, my ascension is dependent or needs to go through someone else. And so I would probably ask them a few more questions about what their intention is to seek knowledge, because like Tadeo pointed out, there needs to be a desire for knowledge. There's so many people in this world who think they want a higher knowledge of God and understanding of God, but yet taking zero action to do it. So how much are they really seeking knowledge, or do they just want it to show up on their doorstep, you know? So, and then once someone establishes that, yes, I do seek a deeper understanding of God, and then kind of talk about what's your concept of God. Do you believe that God is all good? And then it's a matter of who's a qualified teacher. If I were to learn, you know, quantum mechanics or chemistry, I'd go to a chemistry professor or a quantum mechanics professor. So it's seeking a qualified teacher and accepting that they, you know, have that higher knowledge, which involves humility. You know, everything kind of comes down to humility. And but I think choosing that teacher, it does take discernment, and it takes a little bit of research, and it takes acceptance to know that, yes, this person has a deeper understanding of where I want to be, but they're not going to save me, you know, that, getting back to that whole Catholicism perspective. So that would be my approach.
Thank you. I think such valuable points. Something that I remembered something hearing from you guys while I was listening to both of you. Something came back, which Tukram has explained with regards to this point. And I think it was somewhere along these lines of, how narcissistic does somebody need to be to think that you're just so like ready to understand everything, and that you are actually going to not only understand it, but live by it if God were to actually appear in front of you. Like, there are so many miracles happening, yet every day we complain about what we don't have. So if we don't have the vision even to be grateful for something little, what's to speak of actually having a one-on-one, face-to-face, you know, meeting with the Supreme? So that's one point. The second point is, which you brought up, but I'm going to talk about specifically the way he has explained it, which I had forgotten about this until now. He's explained, how do Christians know about Jesus? They know about Jesus through the disciples, you know? So it wasn't, once you have your own experience with God, a revelation, then guess what? That's the beginning of a new tradition, of a new religion. Then you're that prophet, right? But up until then, you're just gaining knowledge from somebody that is a little bit closer, a lot closer in my position, to that truth, to that supreme being. And so if we do require a coach, you know, to become an MBA, you know, player or a translator, which is what I do. I went to school for so many years and I had so many teachers, and I still make mistakes, and I still have to look into dictionaries and research. And like Kim said, looking at your sincerity and looking at different credentials of certain teachers and gurus, if you want to call them that, that's all part of the process. And it can't, you actually, there's no shortcut. And if you think that you're actually ready to do it all on your own and you don't need any help, then it's like, that's a little scary. Just because if you actually think about your whole life, you wouldn't be here if it wasn't for your parents, your family, your friends, your circle of your support group. So how ungrateful do we need to be to think that we could just do it on our own, right? So here, I thought that was a huge point of this text, which is how we receive that knowledge, and how that person that gives us that knowledge is somebody that has also gone through this process of accepting it from somebody above them. And it's a chain, you know, it's a chain reaction, maintaining those teachings as pure as possible, right? Not watering down anything or changing, and becoming teachers in our own right. And in a way, I think, how beautiful is that you have to be, that you are held accountable to become great, because one day you're going to teach somebody else the same thing that somebody else has taught you. And imagine a world where you actually didn't need anybody else and you could just do it all on your own. Like how devoid of love and intimacy that would be, which goes so against actually the nature of the Supreme, who, you know, Kim mentioned is all good. And he's all powerful. He can make it happen. He can give us all these things directly, but instead he allows his representatives to impart this knowledge, and in this way engage in such an intimate and loving relationship with, you know, their downline.
As I was listening to you talking, Varanga, another point came to my mind, which is that you mentioned you need a coach to go to the MBA. You've studied for so long to be a translator. Kim is an IT professional. I'm sure that she spent so many hours learning all these complexities of the IT world to be able to act. And I was talking about our psychology earlier. So presently in our society, we value money, we value material possessions and status. So we assign value to those things because everybody around us is doing that. Now, religion, God, enlightenment, they are not secondary, but they're become almost tertiary things. They're not as valuable because everybody around us in our society are pointing to something different, a new car, a new home, more money, essentially, right? Now, let's try to put this in context. If I have to spend 15 years practicing basketball, twice a day, three hours each time, to just make to the NBA, that's an extraordinary amount of effort. Think about all the effort you've done to become a professional translator and Kim, a professional IT, is an extraordinary amount of effort. I'm trying to exemplify now, what do we really mean about knowing God? So I'm gonna try to put that into our current materialistic society perspective. What if a scientist, perhaps a quantum physicist, were able to invent a time machine? Imagine how valuable that would be. Like, you would be worth billions, if not trillions of dollars, that it wouldn't be worth that much. What does that do? Essentially, we are saying that you would be able to defeat time, because in this machine right now, you can travel through time, so you can defeat the power of time. What we are postulating here is that as a soul, you are eternal. There will be no beginning and no end to your loving and blissful existence. You would transcend time. So in one sense, what we are postulating here is something that is even more viable than a time machine, because never again you will die. Never again you will be subject to be suffering in the clutches of ignorance. You're going to transcend all of this. It to be established in an eternal, which defeats time, relationship with an all-powerful and all-loving being. So this is the value of what we're talking about here. You would even defeat time. Now, if we are okay accepting that I have to spend 12 years practicing basketball to go to the NBA, or all the other efforts that are necessary for us to become good at any one thing, how much more effort then you would require? You would be okay that we should accept it as such, that we are talking about becoming a enlightened being. That's not an easy thing. That's a very valuable thing, which unfortunately through the eyes of our current society, we can't really see. We have eyes, but we don't see. So what we are saying here, the sincerity, the need of bona fide teachers, the need of a bona fide community that will constantly give us this knowledge through which we could defeat time and again embrace our eternal nature, is something of extreme value and therefore requires extreme effort by bona fide teachers in a bona fide community.
I also wanted to make one more point. I'm also a counselor, and with a lot of my clients, what I like to point out and work through is how you approach the issue is the issue. So for someone who says, I don't want to rely on a spiritual community or a guru, a lot of times that can relate to trust issues or abandonment issues. So myself included, anyone who's struggled with that in their life, where they have trouble trusting people, whether they're, they're going to eventually leave me or disappoint me. And just what I've seen in my own spiritual community here, where some of the teachers, they have students who walk away in less than desirable moods, so to speak. It's kind of sad to see how, as you mentioned today, our psychology or our psyche and the unhealed emotions of our past can really limit us in our spiritual pursuits and what's available to us. So.
Wonderful points. Thank you. I thought it would have been incomplete to move from this text without those points. So thank you so much. And I think it actually is such a perfect segue into 17, because Krishna's talking about being fixed and being completely focused on something. And how can you be completely focused on something if you don't know the value of it? And so if you guys want to jump right into 17, it would be awesome.
Sure.
Yeah, you want to read it or?
Yes. So text 17, when one's intelligence, mind, faith, and refuge are all fixed in the Supreme, then one becomes fully cleansed of misgivings through complete knowledge and thus proceeds straight on the path of liberation. I had a few thoughts about this text, and it's a beautiful text, right? It stands by itself or with context. Krishna again is being poetic. However, when I read it, especially if it's a person reading it for the first time, saying, well, when my intelligence, when my mind, when my faith, when my refuge are fixed in the Supreme, to me, it reminds me of a parable that Jesus Christ has in the Bible where he says, you shall love God, your Lord, with all your heart, all your mind, and all your soul. Which to me, in my nature, and then I'm asking, well, what does it mean to love God with all my mind, all my heart, and all my soul? Like, what does it actually mean practically in my life? Like, how can I do that, right? This verse to me kind of points there. All my intelligence fixed in the Supreme, my mind fixed in the Supreme, my faith in my refuge. What does that mean? How is that practical? How can I attain that? How can I know where I am in relationship to me being fixed in this way, right? So I thought what would be interesting is for us to actually go behind the scenes of each one of these and elaborate on them with practical examples. So Intelligence, the first one. What does it mean to have our intelligence fixed in the Supreme? The way that Eastern thought will look at the subtle body, intelligence and mind are actually different things. In the Western world, it's kind of like just one thing, but intelligence has one function, mind has another. So intelligence is really capable of planning, plots, tactics, strategies, etc. So this is the function of the intelligence. So how can I use my intelligence? What does it mean to have my intelligence fixed in the Supreme?
Mm-hmm.
So I would start by dividing that type of intelligence in two. One direct and one indirect. So let's say with my intelligence, I am going to directly fix it in the Supreme. That would mean something like I am planning a festival for Krishna, let's say, which involves a lot of intelligence. You got to get people together, you got to raise money, you got to plan for dates, you got to arrange a bunch of stuff. So you're actually going to have to engage your intelligence directly in Krishna, in serving Krishna. So that is an example of how your intelligence would be fixed on the Supreme. The indirect way would be, say, for example, as we mentioned, Kim is a IT professional. So there are a lot of complexities there, like maybe you're programming, you're dealing with algorithms, or you're managing servers in the cloud, which requires firewalls and like all that kind of stuff. Well, it requires a lot of intelligence. Is this related to Krishna? Well, indirectly, it could be, because I am using my intelligence. That is not necessarily, planning to serve Krishna directly, but indirectly, I'm working and I'm using my intelligence there. Then the fruits of my work, which is to say, the money I make there, I can then use that money in order to support, let's say, the festival we were planning for Krishna earlier. Or to arrange for a temple to fix the roof of a temple, or something that it is then that are directly related to Krishna. So now in this way, our minds can be fixed in the Supreme, either directly or indirectly. Our intelligence can be fixed in the Supreme, either directly or indirectly. Then the mind, again, in Eastern thought, the mind, the function of the mind is really to like and dislike. The mind, the soul will have had certain experiences in its journey through material existence. And some of them were good and the mind wants more. Some of them were bad and the mind wants less. So the function of the mind is really to like and dislike stuff, right? So what does it mean to have our mind fixed in the Supreme? Well, two ways, since the mind has two functions, right? To like or dislike. We would then understand through knowledge given to us perhaps by our spiritual teacher, what are the set of things that will bring me closer to Krishna? Then we should train our minds to want that, right? So if I am engaging with my fellow spiritualists, if I am reading the scriptures, there are actually 9 bonafide processes of devotional service. So we should then know what are those 9 and train our mind to start liking those things, so that our mind is now wanting more, but not more of the things that are going to degrade us, but the mind is wanting more of the things that are going to fix us in the path to liberation, in the path to loving God. So then the mind would want those things instead of wanting more intoxication or more shallow praise from others, and that would temporarily satisfy your mind. So no, we would want things that actually draw us closer to Krishna. And in terms of the mind's function of rejecting things that it doesn't like, then we would train our mind to reject the things that would take us away from Krishna. So again, intoxication or gossip or hatred or greed. So then we would train our minds to identify that those things are, in our surrounding, and our mind would then reject that, because you would say, no, this is part of the things that I don't want. So then if our mind is operating at that level, then our mind is fixed in the Supreme. Faith. And Varangi, that I was listening to you earlier, you brought it up. Faith of the things that I can't yet see how it's going to happen, but it's going to happen. Either is through the help of our teachers, the help of our spiritual community, but they're going to happen. I have an example here, which is an actual example, bonafide, and there's a video on YouTube where you can see this if you're interested. When Prabhupada, the founder of our movement, was actually in New York at that time, I believe, he wanted the community that he was building to record music for Krishna. So then he picked 2 or 3 of his disciples and said, you guys should go to Europe and record an album for Krishna. The devotee at that time, very sweet young devotee at that time, she replied to Prabhupada by saying, Prabhupada, I neither have a voice to sing, nor have the means by which I can get to Europe. Like, it will cost money. Like, how can we even fly there? Like, I don't see how this will happen. Prabhupada said, don't worry, Krishna will help. Just go, just start doing it. And at that time, the internet wasn't as prominent, like communicating with others wasn't as easy. So like letters were being written after, 1 or 2 or 3 weeks. So for you to give you an update on your status. So these devotees, they somehow or another, they raise some money, they are able to buy a plane ticket, they go to Europe, they go to London, I believe. And then, 2 or 3 weeks passes and Prabhupada receives a letter from that very same sweet young lady devotee who said, Prabhupada, you will be pleased to know that we have just now recorded our first album with George Harrison of the Beatles, right? And then he recorded it. I mean, come on, let's put that in context. The freaking Beatles, like a person who believed, I can't even sing. I don't even have money to go to Europe. How is that ever going to happen? How am I going to go to Europe and record an album? That itself was inconceivable. What you speak of going to Europe, recording an item with the freaking Beatles. How could we ever conceive of that, right? So this is an actual factual story. And that's where faith comes in. We don't see it, how it's going to happen, but it's going to happen because Krishna will help. As long as our desire is sincere, as long as our desire is something that will help not only myself, but others, then that faith will carry me through it and it will be manifested because Krishna will intervene and will happen and will help and your sincere desire will manifest. So that's faith. So how can I have my faith fixed in the Supreme? Like that, things that I want that I can't see how it's going to happen, but it's going to happen. And we just continue to be fixed in that faith and it will happen. Then refuge. So refuge is interesting, right? So imagine you are in trouble. And Varangi, you're probably very familiar with this because you work in the court. So let's say I obstructed the law and I am in trouble now. I am in a courtroom and I'm being judged. Let's say whether I'm guilty or innocent is not relevant here, but let's say that's where I am. Well, most people are not comfortable with the law, understanding the law, and what to speak of defending themselves in front of people that are there to specifically judge them and an actual judge, right? So you don't feel comfortable with that. So then what do? We hire a lawyer, a person who supposedly and hopefully knows the law. And then that lawyer will come and they will tell us, you know what? You should say this. You should not say that. You should do this. You should not do that. So now the lawyer is instructing you, like what you do, what you say, what not to do, what not to say, etc. And we take refuge on that lawyer because now we are submitting ourselves to the instructions of that lawyer. And we take refuge. We essentially we take shelter. There is a situation where I find myself, which is bigger than me. I cannot help myself, but here's a person who can, who is trained in this particular subject matter, and I will simply obey. I will do as they say. I will hire them, I'll have faith in them, and whatever they say, I'll do. And in that way, I take refuge in them. So we have our text, we have our scriptures, we have our teachers, and our teachers are teaching us not because it's their nature, because they're merciful beings, but all their efforts that they're putting into traveling and studying and teaching and preaching is mainly for our benefit. They are already, let's say, saved, for lack of a better word. They are, let's say, they are already in love with God. They have already transcended time and sufferings and etc. So all their efforts that they are putting is to help us. So to take refuge means we will find them, the bonafide teacher, and we'll submit ourselves, our very lives to them. Whatever they tell us not to do, we have 4 principles that us devotees of Krishna consciousness have vowed not to engage in. And we take that seriously, and we take that with sincerity. And we do not partake on those 4 things that we vowed not to do. And we do partake on the things that we vow to do, let's say to chant Hare Krishna, both personally and in community with others. And in that way, by living our lives, by adapting our lifestyle according to the instructions of our guru, of our teacher, of our community, we are taking refuge in them. We are taking shelter of them. So then we find the community, we find the teacher, and whatever they say, we do. Not blindly. We can test it, we can rationalize it, we can apply doubts, we can ask questions. But then when all the doubts are answered, when all the reason has been demonstrated, when the math has added up, and most importantly, when you see the members of your community act accordingly so that their philosophy is cohesive with their lifestyle, then you are in a safe place to take refuge of that teacher and of that community and take shelter of them. And when we do that, then our refuge is fixed in the Supreme. So intelligence, mind, faith, and refuge fixed in the Supreme in this manner. When we do that, another benefit, right? Another bonus is that all of our past bad actions driven by hate, greed, lust, and anger are now cleansed, and we regain our eternal good nature, beautiful and blissful nature, because we are cleansed of all of which we are not. All the ignorance that once blinded us is now gone, and we are cleansed from those things. And we now have complete knowledge, and we now proceed straight on the path of liberation. To your point, Varangi, not that, okay, I'm here, I got it, I read a book, I'm now enlightened, I don't need my community. No, it is still a path, but you're now straight on it. You're not gonna deviate. You're not gonna be pushed to do the things that you know you shouldn't do. You're gonna be attentive to the things that you should continue to do. And it is still a path to the day that you actually leave this body and go back to the spiritual world. You are still on that path, but you are now straight. You're not being pulled one way or another, because you are now fixed and you are straight on the path of liberation, and it will only be a matter of time before you see Krishna again. So this is some thoughts I had on this text.
Go ahead.
Oh, I really loved how you broke it down in such a systematic way and gave examples. I think it makes it very relatable. And it covers all the different components of our experience in life that could come up. So it's a very complete lifestyle, a complete existence, so to speak. But thank you for that.
Yeah, my pleasure.
Yeah, excellent. I mean, we could have just ended the episode with you. That was just like, it was very clear. When I was listening to you, I realized that Krishna here has picked these categories, not just whimsically. I guess that's the right word, but really it's from a sliding scale. So from more subtle to gross, right? So the intelligence controls the mind. The mind controls really, you can't have faith if your thoughts aren't in line or regulated or healthy. You know, your, I guess faith could be for good things or bad things, could, you know. So that faith doesn't really take shape unless the mind has already thought about it and built some kind of attachment, or right, that then the intelligence compartmentalizes and plans how to execute it, right? So, and then the faith really is what drives action. And you, how you so expertly explained, refuge really manifest in our surrender to our teachers and to our community and to our the support group, really, that has given us that initial knowledge through which the intelligence, the mind, and the faith took shape, right? And so we see here how Krishna is really has picked the order in which he talked about these things, and how it's so complete. I agree with you, Kim, how it's so complete, and it really exemplifies what a successful life of a yogi looks like when they have taken the time to go through each component fully. Not that they're perfect and they've reached, you know, they have seen Krishna now face to face, but at least they have started to get in touch with Brahman, which we heard just a few texts ago, right? Which is higher than most of us would ever get in one lifetime. So here we're, yeah, it's once those things are in line, once those things are on track, right, then that person becomes cleansed of the impurities of being in a materialistic lifestyle, of thinking or misidentifying with matter. And then he or she is able to continue on this path, and now without that fear of deviating, because that knowledge is already somewhat strongly rooted, and the intelligence, the mind, and the faith is just becoming more and more steady as that person continues on this path. And so I really appreciated the text, and I appreciated the way that you presented it. It was really clear and practical.
It really highlights how even now in our current 2020 society, how detailed the Gita is. I'm amazed. I'm constantly amazed at how it just applies so directly in such detail to our lives now.
Yeah.
All right. Well, we are at the end of our time, pushed a little bit over. And is there anything else that you'd like to close on before we close out?
I just want to express that we are happy to have Varangi back with us.
Oh.
That's right. The Return of Varangi episode now concludes.
That's right.
I'm so happy to be here. It's really such a difference, you know. I really value our time and being able to hear from you and being able to share with you what I've learned and thought about. So thank you for this space, both of you. And yeah, I'm excited for next week.
Oh, all right. Well, thank you guys. Thank you for your time, and thank you to everyone who listened. And we'll see you next week. Haribol.
Haribol.
Hare